Good morning, Mwawi Chilongozi. My name is Natasha Adodo. I am the Communication and Engagement Officer here at the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. We welcome you all to our book launch today, or to the book launch today. I'll just be going through a few house rules or housekeeping rules before we start our event today. So we don't have any fire drills planned today. However, if the alarm does go off, please follow one of the SMP colleagues as they're exiting the room. In terms of toilets, we do have toilets located just through this door at your back, to your left, and then so you immediately turn right once you walk out of the door, right, and then your first left after your right. Hopefully it's not very but just keep walking down the hallway. To everybody in the room as well and online, if you are willing to participate in the event, please do turn on your camera, and everyone in the room, please face the owl over here, and it will detect your voice and your camera beam as well, the camera beam as well. And we do have Wi-Fi in the room. It is the council Wi-Fi. And I think I will be handing over to our moderator of the event today, which is Dorothea Nelson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're looking forward to celebrating the Scottish launch of the Church of Central Africa Presbyterian 1924 to 2024, a centenary assessment, with all of you online and in person here in the Mandela Room at the City Chambers in Edinburgh. Hard copies of the book are available to buy today at £10 there at the end of the table there, and you can give the money, hand the money to Ken Ross at the end of the meeting. It doesn't seem that long ago since we facilitated another book launch together with the Mammy Martin Fund. It was Isabel Reeve's book, Myth and the Reality of the Missionary Family, and it was just along the corridor here in the business centre. On the role of women in the CCAP, and that actually ties into our current book, as one of the 3 parts is dedicated to CCAP women. The other 2 parts are CCAP history and CCAP concerns, but I'm sure that will be dealt with later on as well. And we're actually honoured to have Isabel with us in the room today here as well. We're honoured to have both editors with us today. Reverend Mwawi Chilongozi is live with us from Malawi, and Professor Ken Ross in person here with us in the Mandela Room. In this centenary celebration year, the SNP has been fortunate to meet Reverend Mwawi Chilongozi in person when she was here to visit Scotland at the occasion of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland in May. We also got a glimpse of the big centenary celebration through the lens of the Right Reverend Dr Shaw Patterson's, through the lens of his camera, when the moderator of the Church of Scotland shared impressions of his visit to Malawi with the cross-party group on Malawi in September, and the SNP provides the secretariat for that group. We'll hear much more of the centenary celebrations later on. We're honoured to have so many guests here today, online and in person. A quick look at the programme. You should all have a copy if you wanted it. We will begin with 2 book reviews. The first is from Father Francis Bonongwe in Malawi, and he's here with us now. Father Francis is a Catholic priest in the Catholic Diocese of Zomba in Malawi. He studied church history at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, Italy, and Father Francis has contributed to many articles in the academic world and is currently writing a book on the history of the Catholic Diocese of Zomba. This will then be followed by a second review. Professor Scott Spurlock is here with us in the room. Professor Spurlock is a professor of Scottish and early modern Christianities at the University of Glasgow, with a particular focus on Scottish and Irish religious cultures. We will then hand over to the editors of the book, first to Reverend Dr Mwawi Chilongozi. Reverend Mwawi is the Secretary General at CCAP General Assembly and holds a PhD in Practical Theology from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Reverend Mwawi will tell us more about the centenary celebrations, as I mentioned before. Professor Ken Ross will talk a little bit more about the production of the book. Professor Kenneth Ross was much involved in the inception of the Scotland-Malawi partnership and served as its chair for several years. He is a professor of theology and dean of postgraduate studies at Zomba Theological College in Malawi. Please keep any questions you may have until the end of the presentations, or write them in the chat box, and we will endeavour to answer as many of them, both online and in person, in the room as possible. And now I will hand over to Father Francis in Malawi. Thank you. If you could unmute yourself, please.
Is that all right?
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I hope I'm online now.
So you are, we can hear you.
Okay, fine, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Father Francis Bonongwe at St. Peter's Major Seminary. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to make a book review of this book, The Church of Central Africa Presbyterian, 1924 to 2024, a centenary assessment. A book edited by Kenneth and Mwawi Chilongozi. When I got hold of this book, a Latin proverb came to my mind. Verba volant scripta manent. Spoken words fly away, written ones remain. Sometimes people come to a celebration with the faintest idea what the event is all about. For some people, celebrations mean elegant dressing, good food, drink, and dancing. But for us academicians, we celebrate events with a piece of literature, a literature which recalls and appreciates the achievements of our forefathers. We mark events with books that critically analyze the event we are celebrating. We look at the hopes and the desires of those who were there. We analyze the motives, the actions of those who have lived the reality we are marking. We happily celebrate the successes, and we sadly regret the challenges and failures. For academicians, the celebration brings together a creative mind, a pen, and a piece of paper. This book, a centenary assessment of the CCAP, in the introductory part, the two editors, Rossi and Chilongozi, give a historical background of the CCAP, its establishment, the service of the CCAP and the ecumenical movement, the CCAP centenary, established at Livingstonia, 16th September 1924. They talk about the organization of the book and even a central question, the unity of the CCAP. In this section, the editors ask very serious questions which attracted my interest, having observed with sorrow the territorial wrangles between the synods. The questions are, has the CCAP succeeded in becoming a united church? Or have its constituent parts never truly come together? Still under this introductory section, the editors give a contribution to the literature on the CCAP. And finally, the editors appreciate that the book is the work of many hands. I have read with keen interest and with the eyes of a Catholic historian. First introduction, entitled 100 Years of the CCAP, an introduction by Rodian Munyenyembe. In it, Rodian aims at showing that the CCAP has made and continues to make strides in building the kingdom of God in this part of the world. He clearly stipulates that his aim is to celebrate the achievements of the CCAP rather than criticize what the CCAP has failed to do. No wonder gives 7 achievements and 3 challenges. In his assessment, Munyenyembe is not afraid to highlight the key areas that threaten, like the territorial boundary disputes and their aftermath, diversity and contradictions in the area of ordained women leadership, a weakness that makes CCAP one denomination which lacks the splendor that is beyond the synods, continued neglect of the General Assembly and its premises. Coming to part 1 of the book, CCAP History, I'm reminded of the words of Pope Leo XIII in his letter on historical studies entitled Sepe Numero Considerantes of 18th August 1883. Pope Leo XIII reminded Catholic Christians that the first rule of history is not to dare to affirm anything false, nor to silence something true, so that in writing there are no suspicions of partiality or hostility. Chapter 3 to 7 are very good example of how a good church historian should present historical facts without bias or hatred. Now in chapter 3, which is entitled 100 Years of Meantime, when is the eschaton for the CCAP? In this chapter, Professor Rossi examines the eschatological tension built into the original constitution of the CCAP, the tension between the already and the not yet. The chapter investigates why founding fathers of the CCAP set up the CCAP on page 61. In this chapter, Professor Rossi clarifies that the CCAP is not a federation of churches or denominations, but a union. I was particularly impressed that while Rossi gives the immaculate intention of the founders of the CCAP, he is not afraid to fault them on the accommodation of racism for pragmatic reasons, which defeated the whole purpose of founding an African church. And you get this on page 83. This is the beauty of history, because historical facts are stubborn. Chapter 4, the CCAP in the 20th century, achievements and tensions, authored by Nancy Collins, is very interesting to read. Collins opens her chapter with these words: from its inception in 1924, the CCAP had built-in tensions that would militate against the achievements of unity, cohesion, and common purpose. In this chapter, Collins gives detailed accounts on the achievements and the challenges. Nancy concludes by stating that from the early days, fissures inside the CCAP prevented the church from implementing Robert Law's vision of an inclusive African church. The church repeatedly did not resolve fundamental issues, but found ways of skating around issues to remain together. It remains to be seen what the 21st century holds, but based on history, the prospects are daunting. Chapter 5, the CCAP 2002 Constitution, Intentions Frustrated, authored by Felix Chingora, gives the historical development of the CCAP constitutions, and he laments how this constitution has been frustrated. He concludes by offering solutions, one of which is the goodwill of partner churches as they search for greater unity in the CCAP. What I like about this part one of the book, is the fact that the authors do not dare to affirm anything false, nor to silence something true. In them, there is no suspicion of partiality or hatred. They articulate issues with the eyes of historians. They ask fundamental questions and answer them with historical data, and not through theological teaching. Part 1 has taken all the synods of the CCAP on board. This is very commendable. Part 1 celebrates the historical achievements of the CCAP and does not give a blind eye to the weaknesses that threaten the unity of the CCAP. Coming to part 2, CCAP women. In this part, 4 authors dedicate a good number of pages on issues regarding women. It is an interesting part. Not all authors are men, hopefully in the interest of gender equality or equity. Gilbert Peary in chapter 8 discusses Blantyre Mission women teachers 1940-1965 and their life trajectories. In it we find prominent women like More Bwanausi Zabala, Eda Ela Chitalo, Stella Matewe Mulanga, Ela Chiponde Nkunika, and Abigail Chiringuo Mangulenje. In chapter 9, Mwawi Chilongozi celebrates the leadership roles of women in the CCAP 1924 to 2024. In this chapter, Mwawi gives the triple tradition which define the roles of women in the CCAP. To her, this triple tradition has simultaneously oppressed and promoted women in the church. Dr. Chilongozi concludes her chapter by bemoaning the low numbers of ordained women. In it, she affirms that the CCAP has a long way to go before gender equality within the ministry is achieved. As a historian, I will say achieving gender equality within ministry in the CCAP will take long, because history plays a great role in all spheres of human life. Chapter 10, Women and Development of the CCAP by Gertrude Kapuma. Dr. Gertrude states that women have been active in the life and work of the CCAP. She calls women as pillars of the church, since they are a majority and have significantly contributed towards the growth of the CCAP. Unfortunately, the role of women is hardly recognized by others. Having articulated her issues, she concludes by saying, as created in the image of God, both men and women ought to work in solidarity, put aside differences, recognize different gifts of each gender for the service of the CCAP. This understanding and partnership will take CCAP to another level in the next 100 years. I find part 2, CCAP women, very educative and thought-provoking. This part celebrates the significant roles that have been played in the life of the CCAP by women. It also raises the concerns women have regarding their role. While some concerns can easily be dealt with, others cannot because they touch issues on doctrine. And issues on doctrine are hard to be changed. Part 2 is very engaging, and I wish all CCAP theologians a healthy debate. Coming to part 3, CCAP concerns, which has 9 chapters. The CCAP Centenary is celebrated by raising 8 concerns, namely biblical vision, theology of praxis, ministerial training, preaching, music, evangelism, reconciliation, and unity. The authors are so bold to raise these concerns. They don't just raise the concerns, but they also give solutions. It is up to the reader to agree with their solutions or not. And I was very much fascinated by 2 concerns. 1, CCAP Theology of Practice by Timothy Nyasuru. 2, CCAP Unity by Winston Kawale. In chapter 13, Nyasuru clearly states that a Christian church denomination is identified by distinct religious characteristics that are shared by all its congregations, such as its name, church governance, and discipline, history, organization, leadership, doctrine, worship styles, moral discipline, and sometimes even the founder. Nyasulu argues that the individual synods are but constituent parts of the one CCAP under its General Assembly. If any synod operates in isolation and in an autonomy, then it's failing to abide to the CCAP constitution. Therefore, this calls for a scholarly attention in order to give a theological direction in the matter. There is a need for the CCAP to strengthen its theology stewardship, fight against tribalism, seek uniformity regarding uniforms worn by the guilds. In a nutshell, there is a need to build a strong theological foundation for the sake of CCAP unity. Chapter 19, CCAP unity. Kawale bemoans the long-running border dispute between Nkoma Synod and the Synod of Livingstonia, which is the greatest threat to the unity and integrity of the CCAP in its 100-year history. Chapter 19 is very critical, is a critical assessment which discusses the issues openly and calls the spade by its name. One of the factors which threaten the CCAP unity is
first new message received today at 11:22.
Love of money, the root of all evils. And I agree with Kawale. The monetary motive is a major factor in the border wrangle. He sees this motive embedded in the theology, in quotes, following our children, which Kawale boldly affirms it is blasphemous and heretical. For the sake of the CCAP unity, the border wrangle must be addressed. Finally, let me conclude my remarks about the book in these words. I've taught here in Malawi, Malawian church history here at St. Peter's for 8 years. And one of the topics which I teach my students is the Presbyterians in Malawi. And with this book, I have found a source book for this topic. This book, which is a centenary assessment, has answered a felt need in the history of the CCAP. As a teacher of church history, I strongly recommend the book, a book that every Presbyterian Christian must have. Every person of goodwill ought to buy one, and it must be in our libraries so that whoever is interested in the story of the CCAP in its authenticity may access it. By reading this book, one will know how the CCAP came to be, who were the architects, what it has achieved over the 100 years of its existence, among them the Christianization of this part of the world, the challenges it has encountered, and finally the lessons learned from the history of the CCAP. Having read the book, Presbyterians of goodwill will pray for the greater unity of the CCAP, while the malicious and those who seek self-glory and not the kingdom of God will celebrate the CCAP challenges with tambourines. My dear brothers and sisters, in Christ, let me close my input by encouraging each one of us to buy the book. Promote it. This book, The Church of Central Africa Presbyterian, 1924-2024, a centenary assessment, as edited by Kenneth R. Rossi and Mwawi N. Chilongozi. It's a kind of a historical dictionary of the CCAP. Let us all have it. Thank you for listening.
Father Francis, for the very in-depth review of the book. And just to mention, you can buy the book, but it's also available as an open source download. And we've got the link to the open source download in the chat box, but also around the room here. So if you can't afford buying it, you can still read it. And now to Professor Scott Spurlock with his review of the book.
Yes, so first of all, hearty thanks to today's organizers for this launch, the editors for their fine work, and the excellent contributions of the authors, as well as the superb review offered by Father Francis. I think it might be best to begin by just giving a quick overview into my relationship to the topic, otherwise appearing as a complete interloper in era, geographical expertise, and not least having crossed the cultural chasm that is Scotland's east-west divide. I myself have never been to Malawi, much to my shame, but for over 2 decades have been deeply interested in both the nation and the CCAP. The links are vicariously personal, leading to the academic. On my very first day as a postgraduate student at New College, we were welcomed onto the mandatory research training course by the then director of postgraduate studies, Dr. Jack Thompson. And as anyone who knew Jack would tell you, you can't go too far into any conversation of depth or substance without discovering the passion he had for Malawi. I was also blessed to be a colleague of the estimable Isabel Reed. We were students at the same time when she was beginning her work on the experience of the missionary families in Malawi, which has recently been published. It is an excellent volume. As my studies progressed, I became involved in Morningside United Church, where I connected, or I should say reconnected, to another important figure of Malawian history, Dr. Andrew Ross. He had been the supervisor of my undergraduate teacher as I studied in the States. And over the years, I got to know Andrew well, and quite often would chat to him on the number 35 bus as we made our way back to Morningside. After Andrew's death, Jack took up the task of completing the unfinished manuscript, Colonialism to Cabinet Crisis, A Political History of Malawi, which was published in 2009. And as Jack undertook that process, Andrew's widow, Joyce, got in touch with me asking if I would be Jack's gopher. From chasing footnotes to formatting, I did what I could to help bring that book to fruition and became enamored with the story of the CCAP and its political contributions. So the resulting volume is a testament to Andrew, Jack, and Joyce, but also an infectious introduction to the significance of the CCAP in shaping Malawian society. It's also shaped a more general interest in the Scottish engagement with Southern Africa And some of my more recent research has been looking at the very early missionary work in the Eastern Cape, its establishment of Lovedale, which of course had a legacy on Malawi. The interest has been sustained through my personal professional relationships with Professor Retief Muller at VID in Norway, Professor Henry Mbaya at Stellenbosch, and most of all by the sustained contribution of Professor Kim Ross, who continually reminds us, working in the field of Scottish church history, of the significance of that story beyond Scotland's borders. Now onto the book. As not to cover the ground so insightfully analyzed by Father Francis again, I would like to make some short comments on three distinct aspects of the book. First, relating to the strengths of the book and their importance. Secondly, to identify a few areas where I think constructively some work might be done in the future. And thirdly, what I think the Church of Scotland might benefit from engaging with this book. This volume is a warts and all history of the CCAP, charting the legacy of three separate missions, becoming a new church in 1924-26, linked principally on their shared Reformed heritages, which motivated their cooperation alongside the fraternal links that supported this and have been so skillfully explored by Retief Muller's work on Scots Afrikaners. The first part of this book diligently unpacks the history of the church. It notes the careful selection of a name and the various dynamics motivating a nomenclature that would hold these three missions together, while importantly, from the DRC perspective, keeping Methodists and the London Missionary Society out. The distinctiveness of these three missions and their tradition, of course, laid the stage for the border disputes that would haunt the church, as well as the centrifugal and centripetal forces, as Ken identifies, that characterized the church's first century. These are cogently framed in chapters by Collins, entitled Achievements and Tensions, while Chingoda offers an analysis of the evolution of the church through three constitutions that progressively sought to unify and empower a centralized General Assembly, but the church has been unable to enact those due to the ongoing devolved autonomy of the synods. The centrifugal tendency being complicated by the establishment of the synods of Harare in 1965 and Zambia in 1984, respectively, while those synods also have offered some very distinctive and meaningful contributions, which are explored by Malamelo and Lilongwe. While clearly highlighting historic and long-standing challenges, the framing of the first section of this book as a whole serves as a reflection not just on the past and the present, but in the words used by Ken and others in the book, the eschatological hope of what is yet to be, something so importantly articulated by Chitsulo and Ross, and gives the volume an overall warmth of optimism and faithful expectation. Part two, and the chapters by Mwawi Chilongozi, Kampuma, and Mbia, as well as Kaira, on the contribution of women to the denomination is of huge importance. It demonstrates the commitment to education throughout the church's history, the empowerment of women in local leadership, then into eldership and ordained ministry, as well as the contribution to the national level. It charts the significance of change in the church, while at the same time shines a light on significant disparities within the church that have deep theological roots. And I'll return to this later, at least tangentially. The final section offers a wonderful overview of the distinctive strengths and challenges the church faces at present. From heralding the shared biblical vision by Chitsulu, an assessment of churches, the shared theology being principally rooted in praxis, demonstrated by Nyasulu, a clarion call for a more interrelated, if not necessarily uniform ministerial training by Mpala, and of more intentional training in homiletics, particularly for lay preachers, but also in terms of the theological university's curricula by Chifungo. The contribution of the CCAP's hymn tradition, particularly in light of a lack of common liturgy. Wenda discusses this. A celebration of existing and enthusiasm for new models of ministry by Brantau. The resolute calls for real reconciliation within the church by Chibawa, and the essential continuing commitment to real and realized unity by Kudo. All of these are articulately summarized in the conclusion by Mapala and Ross. And in so doing, the volume provides a remarkable overview of the church's first 100 years, an honest naming of the challenges, and some very compelling and clarion calls for necessary steps to bring the church into its eschatological future. There are a few areas where I would have liked to have seen a bit more light shown, with the caveat that the editors clearly set out in the introduction that the volume was shaped by the voluntary contributions generously contributed to the event preparing for the centenary celebrations. The first of these areas, I would like to say, while the book celebrates a century of moving beyond its colonial origins, it demonstrates the retention or at least lingering legacies of the colonial missions, sometimes like a haunting and unnamed specter or specters. For that reason, it may have been helpful to cast a more critical eye on the distinct missions and their legacies that continue to indwell within the church. There are tacit nods to the legacy of paternalism, but to tease out the theological and ideological progenitors may have been helpful. For instance, the DRC's paranoia about liberalism, even from the 1850s, which would reach an apex in the heresy trial of Johannes du Plessis in 1930, stemmed from a fundamental anxiety over the insidious influence of Scottish liberalism. So too would a history of the handover to Malawian leadership. This is referenced throughout the book, but remains uncatalogued and unaccounted in detail. And why does this matter? It has left a lingering awkwardness in the relationships demonstrated throughout the book. For instance, in the legacy of the border dispute, voices within the CCAP asking why the quote-unquote mother churches didn't meaningfully intervene, anxieties in those churches, partner churches, over their own historic paternalism, and wanting to make sure that that remained confined to the past, and questions over the handover of the disputed region between the Scottish missions and the Dutch Reformed Church, and whether there was compensation or not, or the exact boundaries, all linger as issues which I think inhibit a kind of trusting, authoritative handover to a centralized general assembly. So the story of that transition, I think, needs to be clearer. Telling the history of the CCAP's growth to autonomy might help all parties to learn to act fraternally and equitably. More too might have been said about the centrality of the medical and societal work of the church. Yes, it is heralded throughout, but reflection on the importance of maintaining this, not just theologically, but also pragmatically, in the face of financial strains is, I think, an important discussion to be had. I say this from a church that has, for all intents and purposes, separated itself from its own agency in these spheres. That is in no way to diminish the significance of cross-reach, but it is, to all intents and purposes, even in the eyes of wider society, something distinct from the Church of Scotland. Finally, while the border disputes are referenced throughout the work, the voices and justifications for disputed claims might have been usefully captured, not to strengthen them, but rather to name them, to record them for posterity, and to codify them in a way that they can begin to be unpicked. So finally, I would like to make a couple of comments about the significance of this book for the Church of Scotland. First, there's no equivalent to this study in the Kirk. This is a wonderful volume that wisdom and scholarly expertise brimming in the CCAP has been able to bring its story to clarity and to light. And this is due in no small part to the church's continued engagement with tertiary institutions. They've been able to reflect critically on the past, think about the present, and envisage a brighter future. These are all lessons that we could learn, particularly as the Kirk begins to disengage itself from university partners. Second, the impulse of the Scottish missions in Malawi were, from the beginning, intentionally cooperative rather than divisive, seeking unity even in the diversity. This was not unique to Malawi. Similarly, Scottish missions in the Eastern Cape of South Africa sought to work together, even when the disruption raged at home, pretending that it wasn't the case. But we could benefit from this example of seeking unity even when it is hard, and that it isn't necessarily the result of prioritizing the making of hard decisions, but recognizing the hard truths in which we inhabit. Third, the doctrinal simplicity of the CCAP's theological foundation may be a great strength. Ross cites Robert Law's declaration over the absurdity of imposing the Westminster Standard upon churches planted abroad. Law states the circumstances they have to face are also different. It is out of place to burden a new church with declarations regarding the civil rights of the magistrate and the spiritual rights of the church, where no such question exists. So we had to draft our creed and adapt our procedure to the necessities of the situation. That too might be a lesson for the Kirk. Just in final words, overall, the book demonstrates that our sister church in Malawi has a great deal to teach us, even as she continues to sagely ponder her own future. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for giving us your take on the book and your suggestions and comments. I see Kenneth took quite a few notes, so he may come back to some of them, I don't know. So now it's over to Reverend Mwawi in Malawi. And if you could please tell us a bit more about the centenary celebrations, if you would. Thank you. And you're muted at the moment.
Thank you. I'll just focus on the centenary celebrations and about the book. Much will be told by Professor Moss. This Church of Central Africa Presbyterian, CCAP, celebrated its 100th anniversary on 25th August 2024 at Civil Stadium in Lilongwe. In April 2023, we had a research conference at Zomba Theological University, where CCAP scholars presented papers. And these papers were published in a book, which we are launching today. And from January 2023, a steering committee was constituted, and the committee looked into the preparations for the centenary celebrations. And the members came from all the 5 synods of the CCAP in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Apart from the main steering committee, we also had several subcommittees that worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place as we were preparing for the celebrations. So the celebrations were slotted for the weekend of 23rd to 25th August 2024. So we started the celebrations on Friday, 23rd August, with the book launch. We launched the book we are launching here today. And we had a dinner at the Bingu International Convention Center, BICC, in Lilongwe. The Vice President of Malawi, Dr Mwawi N, was in attendance. So the book was auctioned. We raised some funds, which will help to build the office of the General Assembly. On the 24th August, a foundation stone was laid at the General Assembly office in Area 18 in Lilongwe. That came after we started talking about the centenary. And when people started coming to the office of the General Assembly, they said, no, we need to build another structure as office of the General Assembly. So we agreed that during the celebration, we should lay the foundation stone. So the foundation stone was laid by the moderator of the CCAP General Assembly, Right Reverend Bizwi Kuma. And we had prayers, and this was followed by a march from the General Assembly office to Civil Stadium, where we had other activities. On the 26th August, it was a Sunday, it's when we had the grand celebrations. The state president of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus Makathe Chakwera, and the vice president of Zimbabwe, Mr. Kemo Mohadi, were in attendance. We also had delegates from our partner churches. We had the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, Right Reverend Pat Shaw Patson and his wife, Christine, the moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, Right Reverend Dr. Patricia Dutch-Wars and her husband, Tim. And apart from them, we also had delegates from the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa, the GZB in the Netherlands, and the Reformed Church, Mozambique. The celebrations cemented the unity of the CCAP synods. As we were working together as members from all the 5 synods, it helped us to come together and to work together as synods. And it was the first time in the history of CCAP that Harare and Zambia synods were part of the celebrations. We have done celebrations in the past, but these were not very much involved. But this time, they were part of the preparations and as well as the celebrations. It was not just the church leaders that came, but also Christians were part of the celebrations. The celebrations have helped most people in CCAP to know the offices of the General Assembly and to have an interest in building new offices for the General Assembly. And this is one of the projects that will be taken by the 5 synods. They work together to make sure that we have the offices, new structures at the General Assembly. We have land, but most of the land is just lying idle. But now, because of the celebrations, this is one of the things, one of the outcomes of the celebrations. And that's the thing that we have now for the future. As we look ahead for another 100 years, this is one of the things that we are getting united and doing together. Briefly, this is about the celebration. Thank you.
Thank you for that description of the celebrations and also what has now come after that or is starting to change maybe. And now over to Professor Kenneth Ross. And well, if you could, sorry, give me, what was it? What were you going to do? Talk about the book.
Just a little bit of the backstory, Dorothy, if you'd like to have it. But just to echo Dr. Chilongozi a little bit, the primary launch of the book was in Lilongwe on the weekend of the Centenary celebrations. And I think Dennis, who was there on the occasion, he'll bear me out that it was a very impressive evening with bow ties, tuxedos, glamorously dressed women. So I'm afraid we're a pretty scruffy bunch by comparison, those of us who are here for part 2 in Scotland, but we'll still do our best to do some justice to the book. And we've had these fabulously insightful reviews, both from Malawi and from Scotland. So it's definitely not my role to review the book, but I thought it might be of some interest just to know how it came about and the process that brought the book into being. So as Dr. Chilongozi mentioned, it goes back to a research conference that was hosted by Zomba Theological University in April of last year. And anyone who's had any involvement in producing an academic anthology will know that to get from the conference to the book in 1 year is not a small feat. But the incentive of getting there for the centenary was quite a motivator. So we are excited that we did make it. But that conference in itself was in some way an expression of Malawi and Scotland. because while it was hosted by the university, it could not go ahead without the blessing of the General Assembly and the organizing committee of the Centenary. So we were very grateful for that, and particularly the General Assembly being represented by its moderator, the Right Reverend Biswick Nkoma, and Dr Chilongozi, the Secretary General, who's with us today. But there was also a Scottish element in it, because a grant to support the conference came from the Society in Scotland for the Propagation of Christian Knowledge. Very long title, but actually Scotland's oldest missionary society, formed in 1709, just after the union of the parliaments. And today its resources are much depleted. It's not able to have big programs, but it does have a vision to give relatively small grants that are seed money for something that can grow. And fortunately for us, it recognized this conference as one of these opportunities. So surprise, surprise, there was a Scottish element in the actual holding of the event. But I think an important point to note, and Professor Spurlock alluded to this, is the way that we proceeded with the conference was an open call for papers. So there was no kind of central direction of what are going to be the topics that we address. An open call went out within Malawi, and particularly within the tertiary educational institutions. And so it was really a very democratic methodology, because it was up to people who are interested and motivated about Centenary. What did they feel are really the important themes and issues to lift up? And I have to say, it was quite a surprise to me, the way that it worked out. Because if you look at the literature on the history of the CCAP, you'll find that it's quite heavily weighted towards what I could call the external influence of the CCAP, how it has shaped the nation, the national life at different points, its influence in shaping society. These are the things that have most captured the attention of historians. So we do have a lot of good literature on that, especially on the early period. But this book kind of weighted in a different direction. As Scott said, it does recognize that there's been a big social contribution from the CCAP, which strongly continues today. But really, the weight of emphasis in the book is more on the self-identity and the internal issues of the CCAP, which perhaps fits with a centenary to really be asking who are we, how do we understand ourselves, and what are the niggling kind of issues that we need to deal with. So I think one of my hopes is that its contribution to the literature is a little bit of rebalancing in terms of taking account of the CCAP and its history. And one other rebalancing that it definitely does is it, of course, Centenary is looking at 1924, so that there is some attention to the early history, even the prehistory and the formation of the CCAP. But a great deal of the book is about more recent developments. And that's where the existing literature is much lighter. And actually there's much more to be done. Again, there, I think the book brings something new and brings contributions where there's not a lot of available literature. It should be conceded that in some way it is an insider view of the CCAP. So I think all of the authors in one way or another actually belong to the CCAP. Some of them are employed by the CCAP and others are ordinary members. But they're all in some way identified with the CCAP, and that's why we especially value contribution like Father Francis today coming from outside the CCAP and say, what does this look like? But having acknowledged that, there was a real attempt while writing as insiders also to give an objective analysis and to write with academic integrity. And here I do need to give a shout out for who are often the unsung heroes of a work like this are the peer reviewers. So we had 4 peer reviewers who are in the academic language, they're blind peer reviewers, so I can't even tell you who they are, but I can tell you that they did a very good job. So every chapter was peer reviewed, and there was evaluation and feedback, and the contributors had to work on the feedback that they received from reviewers. So we're hoping that the result is a book that in a way is written from the inside, but can also have academic integrity in the scholarly world in Malawi and beyond. And I think perhaps the last thing I should mention before we get to discussion is about the publication of the book, because of course it's very disappointing if you do all the work of making a book and no one wants to publish it. But in this case, we're fortunate not to have 1 but 3 publishers, and so the book is having a varied life in its different formats. So in a way, the primary publisher is the Malawi publisher, Mzuni Press, which produced 500 print copies in Malawi. And in the production of these, again, there's a Scottish element in it with a grant from the Pollock Trust to help with the cost of producing the Malawi edition. We're very grateful for that, and so the book is circulating. I think there's a steady stream of people coming to Mwawi's office in Lilongwe and through other channels. The book is circulating in the CCAP and more widely, and I think we very much feel that's the primary audience. I mean, these are the people who most need to have and read the book. Are those who are in Malawi and active in Malawi in and beyond the CCAP. But we're also grateful that Mzuni Press has a partnership with the Barnabas Academic publisher in Wellington in South Africa. So there is a South African edition of the book, a print edition. And the good thing with this is that our Malawi publishing has good reach within Malawi, but not much reach beyond Malawi. There is the African Books Collective. Most of the Mzuni Press books you can order from African Books Collective, which does give a wider reach. But in the Southern African region, the books are not all that easy to access. So this is where the South African partnership is very valuable, and we're delighted that the Barnabas Academic Edition is now out and available in South Africa and elsewhere in the region. But then also on a global level, we were really delighted that the Globe Ethics open access publisher was willing to do an edition. And I think, Chad, I think the access to that is going to be available even here.
It's been available on the event page. Everyone registered will receive another link to it, and it's in the chat box now for the people online.
Terrific. So I always like to, I feel out of integrity, I've really got to say this, even when I'm trying to sell hard copies, like I am. And this is the Malawi edition that's here and available for a mere £10 today. If you're old-fashioned like me and you like an old-fashioned book actually in your hand, this is your chance. But if you've moved into the 21st century and you like to download it on your screen, then the Globe Ethics edition, very nicely produced and very readable on screen, it is available. And of course, what we're hoping is that it will give a global reach, and people who might never come to Malawi or to Africa at all will have an opportunity to access the book. So we're delighted that the book is quite widely available, and we hope it will have its dual function of celebration and critique, as Rodian said it very nicely in his opening chapter. We're on a centenary, and there is so much to celebrate about the amazing life of the CCAP. But this is not only a flag-waving exercise. I think, as the reviews have pointed out, there is a critique that I think everyone who has the future, the CCAP at heart, will want to ponder the critical points, and we hope that the book then can be an agent in shaping the next 100 years to be even more a fulfillment of the vision that brought the CCAP into existence in 1924. Thank you, Dorothea.
Thank you, Professor. Yes. We have, this is the moment when you can ask your questions. We do have one question online, so I wondered if, Deborah, you wanted to ask your question in person. So if so, then if you could put your camera on and unmute and ask the question, that would be wonderful.
Right. I can't see myself. Not that that's important. Right. That was terrific. Thank you very, very much, everybody. I'm sorry I'm not in Edinburgh, so I can't shell out my £10 and get a bargain hard copy, because I'm also old-fashioned. What I wanted to ask about relates to my background working on missionaries in South Africa, the history of British and American missionaries in South Africa, and more recently on mission education. So I just wondered what space there was in this very rich, very full book for the missionaries who went to Malawi, and secondly, the whole question of mission education, because as I say in the chat, when I was trying to find out about mission education years ago, I was reading John McCracken on Livingstonia. So I just wondered, how much does mission education feature in the book, and how much do the missionaries feature? Thanks.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Debbie, for the question. I think an honest answer might be not very much. And partly because historians like the late John McCracken have addressed this to such great effect. So the Scottish missionaries do feature, but in a very selective kind of analysis, because it was their vision originally that there should be this one united Presbyterian church to serve Central Africa in their language. I mean, they conceived this very early, even from the 1880s and 1890s, the first generation of missionaries like David Clement Scott and Robert Laws, whom you mentioned. But as African Christians were coming into leadership in the church, they also identified with it. So it was a missionary conception initially, but very much embraced by the African community as well. But I think the particular analysis that we have of the missionaries is how paradoxical was their involvement in the 1924 Union. And in one way, it was a very pro-African vision. And the vision of a united church was very much bound up with the vision of an indigenous church. So it was all about the idea that a fully African church would emerge. But the other side of it is that more than they probably realized, they were influenced by the colonial and even racist attitudes that were highly current at that time. So they wanted to see this wonderful, fully African-led church, but not quite yet. So they were kind of launching this new thing, but they were also putting the brakes on it at the same time. And a thing that we can see is, I mean, fair play to them, they did an amazing job in their time. But we can see it more clearly is that by making a united African church, but keeping the missions completely separate in their operations and retaining the lion's share of the resources in the missions, they actually created a dynamic of division at the same time as they were trying to fulfill their vision of unity. Such is our human frailty. So the missionaries do appear, Debbie, but it's in a particular line of analysis. So you would probably have to go elsewhere, and there's even there's a lot of current work being done on Malawi in terms of the Presbyterian education. So with Gilbert Peary, who was mentioned and who has a chapter in the book, has a new book coming out on Blantyre mission education. There's just been a successful PhD by Hawkins Gondwe on Nkoma mission education, and there's several contributions, recent contributions on Livingstonia's very extensive educational networks. So there is plenty of material on that, but it's not so much represented in this book.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the room? Emma and then Eve.
I was really interested in your comment that talked about the diversity and seeking unity whilst recognising hard truths was the comment you used. And I just wondered if it was possible to give an example of maybe one of those things about how unity was achieved in the face of hard truths.
do we want all the questions first and then the answers, or do they tie in, or would you like the answer first and then,
I guess my question does tie in with what you're asking, because there are three missions that have come together to create this unity in CCAP that also has the cohesive element of African theology. And there is a lot that we can learn from that. And I'd like to encourage and find ways to hear more of that theology, that our relationship with the Lord, and how CCAP interprets that and encourages that.
It's sort of related to that. And what I found missing in the book, and I know why it's missing because of the nature of it, was anything about relationship with other religions, in particular the idea of what from African theology, or how African theology linking with the theology that was brought. And also its relationship with other denominations and either other religions like Islam. There's nothing said about cooperation, like through the Christian Service Committee, or indeed conflict, like Hitler went writing about Roman Catholics. I felt that it was a rather inward-looking sort of document, while I agree with all the positive things that you said about it.
there another question in the room still? Isabel, were you wanting to ask a question as well?
Well, I am really delighted by this section on women, as you would expect me to say. I note that it's 4 contributions out of 20. That's not bad going, actually. I think that one of the central issues from the beginning was the silencing of women. And I think that the fundamental strength of this then is that you have stepped around that. And further, I think that this is the pathway to the future for all of us, of course, wherever the issue of the historic silencing of women means that there is 50% of wisdom that has been lost. And therefore, as the CCAP moves forward, I would certainly hope that the silencing of women really can respectfully end, because it's the foundation of wisdom. Men and women working together is the basis of nature. And from a theological point of view, this has been, to say the least, embarrassing. So thank you for this.
So I'm not sure who wants to answer, but yes, when it comes to co-editors who would want to.
Yeah, well, let me defer to, I wonder, Mwawi, do you want to come in with any thoughts on these questions? I know you definitely have thoughts on the role of women.
Sorry that I didn't clearly get the questions.
Okay.
I knew you were writing, so I thought you'd take off the questions.
Well, perhaps we could together we could address this last question. I think about women. Maybe I could address the past and you could address the future. Because I know there is a current project, particularly about the upcoming 25th anniversary of the ordination of women in the CCAP. But if I could just mention a word about the past, Isabel, which I know will relate to your own interests, that Mamie Martin was actually present in 1924 at the Union, and she was appalled by the silencing of women at the time. You know, we're able to look back from our perspective of gender awareness, but she already saw it at the time, and she was very outspoken about it. So women have been protesting about this exclusion for even the whole 100 years. And it was quite intentional to have a section in the book on women, simply because they have been written out a lot of the history, although they were actors in the history, but often not acknowledged. So it was an intentional move to say, no, let's dedicate an entire section of the book and try and capture some of this contribution. But that's the past. I think I should ask Mwawi to say more about the future of women leadership in the CCAP.
Thank you. As it is in the book, women have played a big role in the church in terms of being very active, in terms of membership, being the ones who are in majority in the church. Unfortunately, in the early years of CCAP, and even during the missionaries, before CCAP was formed, women were not allowed to be leaders in the church until maybe in the 1930s, when they started ordaining, in the Livingstonia, when they started ordaining women as elders and deacons. And in Blantyre, I think it was in the 1960s. But for Nkoma Synod, it has taken long. It's only about 3 years ago that they allowed that women can now be elders and deacons. Previously, they would say yes, but when they meet again, they would rescind that decision. But now they have finally said yes, women can be elders and deacons, but not ministers. So in the CCAP family, you will see that it's only 4 synods that ordain women as ministers. So we started in the year 2000. So next year will be 25 years of women's ordination. And now we want to celebrate that. And we'll have a research conference in November from the 27th to 29th. And there is a book that will come out of that conference. And we are sure next year we'll have those celebrations. However, we don't want to leave those from Nkoma Synod out, even though they don't ordain women. As we'll be celebrating the 25 years, we want women from Nkoma Synod to be involved. I know there are some women who have studied theology in Nkoma Synod. So we would include those to be part and parcel of the conference, but also in the writing of the book. And sure that because of that, maybe somehow the church the Nkomasin will be influenced to think critically about the ordination of women. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps I could briefly address the other questions, since I think it was difficult for Mwawi to hear the other ones. So on your question, Eve, I think if I got it right, it's relating to the issue of spirituality. And I would say that is a unifying feature of the CCAP. Although you can detect differences between the three synods at the level of spirituality, if you were to compare a Malawian Christian's spirituality with someone elsewhere, say in Europe, they have so much more in common with each other than they do with those who are outside. So I think there's a very strong commonality at the level of spirituality that is quite a binding cement. So that it's really, there's no difficulty in Christians from the different synods praying together. We saw that very vividly in the Centenary event. And it maybe relates to the question of how do you acknowledge hard truths while still being united. And I think the book does address that, because Presbyterians have been very good at dividing from each other. Our Scottish history is replete with evidence of this. And so it's not hard in the Presbyterian mentality to say, oh, you, the other side, you've got it all wrong, so we need to break away and hold on to the real truth. But that's actually never happened in the 100 years. Well, it did. I should correct myself. It did happen once in the early 1990s. It was really over the issue of what we might call charismatic worship. And it was a Blantyre kind of splinter group that broke away. But there was then a kind of reconciliation. Anyway, don't need to go into the details. By and large, there's not been any big fragmentation of the kind that was seen in Scottish Presbyterian history. So the CCAP has managed to sustain its unity at one level. But if you read the book, and perhaps especially the chapters at the end by Chiboa and Kawali, they are acknowledging that there's been some very divisive and disruptive behavior, even in recent times, and even up to today in the CCAP. So this is not the kind of book that's saying everything in the garden is lovely. There is a real reckoning with serious problems that the CCAP has in really achieving a meaningful unity. And a lot of it comes back to the role of the General Assembly and an ongoing tendency of the three Malawian synods to marginalize the role of the General Assembly, rather than giving it its constitutional role of being the Supreme Court in the Church. So these kind of ongoing struggles are very much acknowledged and recognized, and there's a call for engagement with them. And then on the ecumenical question, I mean,
maybe,
one thing that,
Professor, maybe before you go to the ecumenical, can I just add on that one?
sure.
I think for Christians in CCAP, they don't have much programs in terms of the spirituality, because if I'm from Livingstonia Synod and I've moved for whatever reasons and gone to Blantyre Synod, I'll take a letter from Livingstonia and go to Blantyre Synod. I'll be accepted as a member of that church. And so this has been happening. I can move to Nkoma Synod. I can take a letter. I'll be part of the Nkoma Synod and as a member of that church. Equally, from Blantyre, people can come to Nkoma, they can come to Livingstonia. So we are just one church, although we differ in the liturgies. But when I am moving to Zomba, let's say I've moved to Zomba Theological University, I'll be a member of the CCAP Blantyre Synod, although I'm from Livingstonia. As long as I get a letter from there, then I'm accepted as a member of the Blantyre Synod. So that's how things work for Christians. But that will be very difficult for ministers. If I go to Zomba, Blantyre Synod may not accept me as a minister that I can have a congregation in their synod. That becomes a challenge. The same way in Nkoma Synod. I may go and preach, but I cannot be given a congregation. I may go to Nkoma, preach, but I cannot be given a congregation, although I'm in their jurisdiction. So that's how things work, and that's the challenges that we face from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I come back on the ecumenical question, Dorothea? So the ecumenical dimension is not absent from the book, and it is, especially in the introduction, we talk about the role that the CCAP has played in ecumenical affairs. But the thing that perhaps we can forget, when we had the conference, there were more than 30 papers. And as you can see, there's only 18 that actually reached the stage of getting into the book. And one of the proposed papers that didn't quite come to fruition yet, but could still do, is one by Silas and Chozana. And it's on this very theme. And what he wanted to do is to go back to the very beginnings of the life of the CCAP at Cape Maclear. And he wanted to argue that the CCAP was ecumenical from the beginnings. So it was all about a collaboration in the way that it started. And also because it started at Cape Maclear, there was already an Islamic presence there. So that kind of from the word go, inevitably there was an interface with Malawians who had adopted Islam as their faith. And of course, the other big religious tradition in Malawi, the African traditional religion, immediately they had to be engaging with this. And the spirituality that we're talking about is a kind of interplay of Christianity with the African tradition. So I think we have to admit, in answer to your question, that there's a little bit of a shortcoming, but if you happen to bump into Silas Chozana, you could encourage him to finish his chapter.
Come on.
Did you want to make a comment now?
Well, seeing as you asked me, in terms of ecumenism, as you know, Sandy and I spent most of our time in Malawi associated with the Roman Catholic mission. And I was, in terms of schism and how easy Presbyterians find it, to split. There might be the possibility of extending the Roman Catholic input and ask them, how do they do it? You know, there is really a lot to be learned from the Roman Catholic Church because they hang together. So it will be a very, very interesting dialogue, I think. And a simple question, how do you do it? And you give us some pointers to the future.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I think let's just celebrate what joins us together rather than think about what takes us apart. If there are not any further questions, then we've now reached the time that we've sort of had allocated for this meeting, for the online Zoom meeting. People in person can continue the conversation here. But if you wanted to say anything, otherwise I wanted to obviously thank all the speakers, Father Francis and Dr Mwawi Chilongozi and Professor Kenneth. Thank you very much. And to Professor Spurlock. Thank you.